Haunted by whispers of a curse, veteran Michael Harris thought buying a forgotten house for $800 would buy him peace. But his retired service dog, Shadow, knew better. On the first night, the dog froze before the old stone fireplace, trembling with a warning that felt older than the house itself. When Michael uncovered a sealed iron box hidden in the hearth, he realized this wasn't superstition, it was evidence. Someone had poisoned a town, silenced a teacher, and buried the truth in stone. Now, as strangers circle his home and the snow begins to fall, Michael must decide whether to run or finish what she started. If you believe truth always finds its light, support our stories by subscribing to the channel. The snow had just begun to fall over Riverton, Colorado, when Michael Harris pulled his pickup truck to the edge of the old auction lot. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke, and the sky hung low and gray, the kind of sky that promised silence more than storm. He stood there for a moment, gloved hands tucked in the pockets of his flannel jacket, eyes on the crumbling notice board where a single paper flapped weakly in the wind. Foreclosure auction. Property at R18 Holloway. $800. That was the winning bid. No one else had raised a hand. The auctioneer's voice still echoed in Mike's memory, tired, disinterested. The city's tried to sell it 3 times. Last owner vanished back in '09. Locals say it's haunted or cursed. You sure about this, Mr. Harris? Mike had simply nodded. I don't believe in curses. He believed in second chances, the kind earned, not given. Now, standing in front of his new house, he understood why no one else had wanted it. The small 2-story home leaned slightly to one side, its gray shingles warped, the yard overtaken by waist-high grass stiff with frost. The porch sagged under the weight of years, and ivy crawled up one window like a slow green flame. A single tire track, half buried in snow, hinted that someone had been here not long ago, but the rest of Holloway was empty, swallowed by silence. Shadow, his German shepherd, jumped from the truck bed, landing with a crunch on the snow. The dog was 7 years old, sable-coated with a black saddle and alert amber eyes that scanned the world with practiced caution. Once a military working dog, Shadow had retired the same year Mike had, both carrying scars they didn't talk about. The bond between them ran quiet but deep. Years of trust built through fire and dust overseas. Mike adjusted his worn Carhartt work jacket. The rugged tan-brown canvas faded from time but still sturdy, and took a slow breath. Well, buddy, he murmured, looks like home. The house didn't answer. The wind did, soughing through the pines. Inside, the air was thick with dust and old smoke. The floorboards creaked under his boots as he walked from room to room, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. A table still stood in the kitchen, covered with a sheet of gray dust. On it sat a cracked coffee mug, fossilized in place. Beside it lay an open book whose pages had curled inward with moisture. Mike crouched, tracing the edge of the table with a gloved finger. Someone left in a hurry, he said under his breath. Shadow padded beside him, tail low, nose twitching. The dog paused near the fireplace, a wide stone hearth blackened with soot. He stared at it intently, ears pricked forward, then gave a low growl that vibrated through the room. Mike straightened. What is it? The dog didn't move. Eyes locked on one particular stone near the center of the hearth, one that looked slightly newer than the others. Mike noted it, filing the detail away in the soldier's part of his mind that cataloged everything unusual. But he didn't pry, not yet. He spent the next few hours checking the windows, the doors, the locks. The main door's bolt was rusted and stiff, but the padlock on the basement hatch looked disturbingly new. That unsettled him. Someone had come back here, not long ago, and locked something in. By sunset, the valley turned to copper light. Mike stepped outside, brushing snow from his flannel sleeve, and watched his breath fog in the cold. Across the road, a woman in a long brown coat stood near the fence line, watching him. She was in her late 50s, dark hair streaked with gray, posture straight despite the chill. When he lifted a hand, she hesitated, then approached. "You must be the one who bought the Price house," she said. Her voice carried the gentle rasp of age, the kind that came from both kindness and cigarettes. "Linda Gomez. I live 2 houses down. Or, well, used to, before everyone else moved away." "Mike Harris," he replied, shaking her hand. Her palm was cool but strong. She gave a small, wary smile. "You got it cheap. Most folks wouldn't touch this place." "Because of the story?" he asked. "Because of what happened," she corrected tautly. "The teacher who lived here, Eleanor Price, sweet girl, taught at Riverton Elementary. One night she vanished. Some say she went mad, others say she found something she wasn't supposed to. Either way, no one's lived here since." Mike leaned against the porch post. "And you believe that?" Linda looked past him at the crooked roof and dark windows. "I believe silence has a weight to it, and this house carries more than its share." She paused, her breath forming small clouds. "Still, you look like a man who's not afraid of ghosts." He smiled faintly. "Not anymore." Linda nodded, as if that answer made sense, and adjusted the scarf around her neck. "If you need anything, I'm just down the road. You'll see the red mailbox with the bent flag. And keep your dog close at night. Strange things tend to stir when spring's late." With that, she turned and disappeared into the dimming light. Mike watched her go, then looked back at the house. The last of the sunlight had turned the windows into mirrors, reflecting the pale sky. He could almost see himself in them, a solitary figure framed by ruin, one man trying to build something solid out of other people's fear. That night, he unpacked only what he needed: a lantern, his duffel, a notebook, a can of beans for dinner. Shadow lay near the fire, head resting on his paws, ears twitching at every groan of the old wood. Mike flipped open his notebook and began to write. A habit from the Army, a way to keep order in chaos. Day 1, house secured, signs of prior occupation within last decade, locals superstitious, possible structural decay, no visible hazards. The lantern flickered, throwing slow-moving shadows across the walls. Somewhere behind the chimney, something creaked. He ignored it, focusing on the rhythm of his pen. Outside, wind whispered through the trees like a voice just beyond hearing. Shadow suddenly raised his head, ears standing upright. His gaze fixed again on the hearth, tail stiff. Mike followed his eyes. One of the stones seemed slightly darker, the mortar around it uneven. "Tomorrow," Mike said quietly. "We'll take a look tomorrow." The dog's ears lowered, but his eyes didn't leave the stone. Mike leaned back in his chair, closing the notebook. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't sure if the silence around him was peace or warning. He reached down, resting a hand on Shadow's back. "We'll be fine," he murmured. "We've seen worse." The dog's tail thumped once against the floor. Outside, the snow thickened, wrapping the house in white stillness. Inside, the old hearth seemed to breathe, stone by stone, as if waiting for someone to finally listen. The morning after the auction settled into a pale hush, the kind of cold that gentled the pines and made the creek mutter under a skin of ice. Inside the cabin, the chill felt older than weather, as if the wood had learned to keep secrets. Mike woke on the floor beside the cold hearth, shoulders stiff, breath ghosting in the lantern's last glow. Shadow had not truly slept. His ears kept a quiet ledger through the night, ticking at each groan of timber and sigh of draft. The dog rose when Mike did, stretching long, paws splaying, a silent sentinel resuming his post. Mike brewed coffee on the camp stove, the flame a small stubborn flower, then walked the perimeter in the slow, soldierly loops. He logged everything, warped sill at the east window, door bolt rusted to stubbornness, a basement hatch with a padlock too new for the rest of the house, a faint, metallic sour odor near the kitchen wall that came and went like a thought one tries to forget. When Shadow paused at the hearth and fixed on the subtly darker stone at its center, Mike whispered, "I see it," and wrote "Do not pry yet" in a square of block letters. Caution is a habit you keep, or it kills you. By noon, he'd aired the rooms and set 2 motion bells, rudimentary rigs of fishing line and rusty hooks he'd found in a drawer. The bells were clumsy, but Mike trusted clumsy things. They confessed their limits. He found a paperback on the kitchen table, its swollen pages stalled at a chapter about a woman who leaves town and never returns. Odd coincidence. He took a photograph with his phone, then slid the book back exactly as he'd found it. As he stepped onto the porch, Shadow's head snapped toward the tree line. Frost-silvered grass lay untouched except for one thin seam of prints angling from the side of the porch toward the pines. They were small, half a boot length shorter than Mike's, edges crisp, made within an hour. He followed them to the first stand of spruce where they dissolved into bark shadow and needles. The air tasted of cold iron. "We've got company," he told Shadow. The dog's only answer was a low, steady rumble deep in his chest. 3 days slid by like cards turned on a table, morning light, repairs, notes, and nights that never fully slept. Each evening, the house breathed differently. One night, the west wall ticked like a metronome. Another, the joists sighed in a pattern too regular for mere settling. Mike sketched the rooms to scale and marked sounds by time. Yo210, a soft scrape near kitchen baseboard. 0347, a 2-beat tap from behind the hearth. 0412, faint scratch at back hall paneling. Possible vermin? The notes steadied him. When patterns emerge, fear retreats. Shadow learned the rhythm, too, moving station to station, pausing longest by the hearth as if guarding a gate only he could smell. On the 4th morning, a county sedan rolled up in a puff of cold breath. The man who stepped out wore the uniform of a small-town deputy that had weathered more winters than budgets. Olive green faded toward gray, a badge dulled by proud polish. Deputy Carl Benson was early 50s, tall but soft in the middle, a red-gold beard kept short not out of vanity but pragmatism. His eyes were sea-glass blue, the kind that try to be kind and end up cautious. His handshake was firm enough, but there was a carefulness in it, as if he'd learned a long time ago not to promise what a badge can't deliver. "Mr. Harris," he said, tipping the brim of a hat that had seen hail, heat, and funerals. "Welcome to Holloway. Folks call me Carl." The tone was neighbor first, lawman second. "Appreciate you stopping by. Mike said. Shadow stood at heel, a still bronze statue with living eyes. Heard you picked up the Price house, Benson added. A glance toward to the chimney flicked quick as a sparrow. Place has a history. We keep an eye on it. History doesn't bother me, Mike said. Benson's mouth tugged in a small smile. It's not the history that does the bothering. It's the people who remember it differently. He didn't write that down, but Mike did later. The deputy looked over the porch rail, scanning like a man who'd once been quicker with his reflexes and learned, somewhere between a domestic call gone wrong and a winter wreck, to let the scan finish before deciding anything. If you hear things, don't panic. Old houses talk. When they shout, call me. He offered a worn business card, corners softened by pockets. We're thin-staffed, but I'll come. As he turned to go, he added gently, And, Mr. Harris, keep your dog inside after dark. It wasn't an order. It was advice cut from the cloth of experience. That afternoon, the wind swung north and a fine flurry dusted the ground. Mike was mending a cracked porch step when a rustle and a half-swallowed gasp came from behind the shed. He stood slowly. You can come out, he said, keeping his hands visible. A girl emerged, 17 at most, all elbows and urgency, with an auburn ponytail that Wand had tried to untie in a denim jacket 2 weeks too light for the air. Emma Collins had freckled cheekbones, chapped knuckles, and eyes the color of creek water when a cloud passes, earnest, bright, stubborn. She held a mirrorless camera like a talisman, the strap bandaged with tape. I'm not trespassing, she blurted, which is how trespassers usually begin. I'm just documenting for a blog. On haunted houses? Mike asked. On small-town myths, she corrected, spine straightening. And who benefits from them? The edge in her voice had the shape of a father who scoffed, a teacher who rolled eyes, a town that told her to sit on her hands. Emma, Mike said, nodding toward the tree line. You were here at dawn 2 days ago. Her mouth opened, closed. I took some shots, long exposure, from the road. From my side yard, he said mildly. What did you see? She bit her lip, then thumbed her camera on and flicked to a frame. The photo showed the house in a shallow pool of pre-dawn blue. One window, low, right of the hearth, held a thin saber of light, not lantern warm, but electric white and sharp, as if a beam had swept past from outside and caught on glass. No car engines, no footsteps, she said, as if reciting in self-defense. Just that. Email me the raws, Mike said. She blinked. He continued. I'm not here to spook you, but if you're going to circle this place, do it with a coat and with someone who knows where to stand when a situation goes sideways. Her chin softened a fraction. Do you believe the curse? I believe in people and in patterns, he said. Curses are what we call patterns after they've hurt us long enough. She weighed that, then nodded once, briskly. I'll send the files. She took 2 steps, paused. They used to say Ms. Price kept a lamp burning in the window so kids walking home would know someone cared. A flush rose on her cheekbones, embarrassed by the sentiment she'd just confessed. My mom remembers it. Then she was gone, quick as a fox, the camera a bright wink before the pines took her. 2 evenings later, the bells at the back door chimed once and went quiet. Mike froze mid-note, Shadow's head lifted, body rigid. The house held its breath. He moved to the shadow of the kitchen arch, counting silently, 30, 60, 90, and then eased to the door. No knob turn, no scrape. He cracked it fast and low, nothing but wind smoothing the grass. Yet the kitchen had changed in the smallest, ugliest way. The gas valve on the stove sat askew by a quarter turn. He shut it, opened windows, let the night pour through, and wrote, "Someone wants accident." He added 3 underlines and a time stamp. Later, he took a slow lap of the property and found a scuff on the outside sill above the sink, the shallow U of a boot toe. That night, he moved his sleeping bag closer to the hearth. Shadow lay between him and the door. At 2:13 a.m., the wall behind the baseboard uttered a dry skitter, then a pause, then a second skitter lower and to the left. Mice don't hesitate like that, he thought. People do, when probing a hollow. He traced the sound's path with a fingertip across old paint, then pressed his palm flat to the wood. It was colder along one slender vertical seam, as if air leached from behind it. He fetched his pocket knife and, with delicate patience, worried the seam until a sliver of panelin lifted. Something slid free and fell like a leaf. An envelope lay on the floor, yellowed, the flap sealed in brittle fatigue. On the front, in tidy schoolteacher script, "For whoever listens." Inside, a brass key, long and old, and a small torn note. "Don't let them fix the pipes. The water carries what they buried. If this reaches you, I'm gone." The letters leaned forward as if running for their lives. Mike turned the key in his fingers. Too antique for any modern latch, but close kin to the old cellar hasp. He tried it. It entered, caught, refused the last quarter turn. Someone had updated the lock after this key was hidden. He made another note, slow and careful. Original access compromised. Replacement lock new. The next day brought a sullen sky and a visitor shaped like bureaucracy. A Silver City sedan climbed Holloway and delivered a man in a navy windbreaker embroidered with the municipal crest, clipboard at the ready, and smile already loaded. Daniel Ricks, building compliance, mid-40s, gym-soft with desk shoulders, hair thinning in a way vanity tried to disguise. He shook hands like a man who kept count. His pale eyes moved like calipers over the doorway, the stove, the ceiling. He tutted at vents and frowned at the gas line precisely twice. "Old place," he said, tone polished to professional concern. "Honestly, Mr. Harris, it's a liability waiting to go off. I can help you expedite a sale to Northbridge. Fair price, quick close, win-win." The name dropped between them like a match in dry grass. Mike said only, "Not selling." Ricks's smile thinned to business. "Well, don't say you weren't warned." His tires spat gravel like punctuation. Mike wrote, "Compliance guy is pressure front. Ties to Northbridge." He spent the evening with Shadow in the notebook, mapping what he knew and what he didn't. He added a column titled "Who Benefits" and another titled "Who Watches." Beneath Who Watches, he wrote, "Teen blogger with tenacity, deputy who cares but measures his steps, unnamed night visitors, compliance man who knows too much." The list steadied him. The house creaked. He looked at the darker hearthstone and almost laughed, the oldest piece of theater in the room pretending it wasn't a stage. The wind rose after midnight, but the bells did not ring. Instead, a weak beam swept once across the low kitchen window, then blinked out. Shadow stood without a sound, moved to the glass and inhaled as if scent were a book he could read. Mike let the quiet stretch until the quiet seemed like a lie. then clicked on the porch light and stepped into the cold, revolver holstered but close. Snow beaded on his flannel like dusted sugar. At the edge of the yard, where frost met tree shadow, was the soft glow of a cigarette, or the ember of a cheap lighter, cupped in a hand, then gone. He did not chase it. He had learned long ago the difference between bait and opportunity. He returned to the table, wrote, "Someone out there waits for dark to decide." Then, lower, because the truth sometimes asks for poetry to fit inside a small line, "This house isn't haunted, it's listening." By week's end, the pattern had hardened into something like intention. Shadow tracked it with the patience of an old scout, a pause by the hearth, a drift to the back hall seam, a settle by the door at 2 a.m. sharp. On the seventh night, at 2:02, the bells chimed twice, clear, quick, like a breath caught and released. Mike's heartbeat slowed rather than sped. He took his place by the kitchen arch, shadow low and ready. The knob flexed a fraction, then stopped. The window whispered against its track and sealed again. Whoever haunted the yard had learned his alarms and was testing his margins. Tomorrow, Mike told the hearth, the panel, the dog, and himself, we open the stone. Shadow's tail thumped once, agreement signed in muscle and trust. The walls breathed in, the wind breathed out, and in the soft, stubborn silence between those breaths, the house seemed to nod. By dawn, frost glazed the window panes like opaque glass, dimming the gray light that crept through the trees. Mike woke early, long before the sun had the courage to rise, his body still tuned to military hours. The fire in the hearth was cold, but his mind was already moving. He had promised himself that today he would break the stone. Shadow stirred at his feet, shook himself once, and stood ready, tail steady but alert. Together they began the day as soldiers did, quietly, methodically, one task at a time. The hearthstone was heavier than it looked. It took an hour of prying with an iron bar before the mortar cracked along its seam with a sound like bone splitting under pressure. Beneath lay a hollow space no larger than a bread box. Dust swirled, gray and ancient, and from that hollow he lifted a tin box and a small leather-bound journal wrapped in waxed cloth. The box bore the faint stenciled letters E. Price. He opened the tin first. Inside were soil and water samples in sealed glass vials, their labels faded to ghosts of handwriting. Next, folded papers, lab results stamped from Riverton County Environmental Division, dated 15 years earlier. The numbers were unmistakable, traces of arsenic and industrial solvents. He read each line twice, pulse slowing in disbelief. The contamination wasn't rumor, it was record. The journal smelled faintly of smoke and lilac. Its first page read, Eleanor Price, Riverton Elementary. Personal notes, not for submission. The handwriting was neat, the kind of script that once corrected children's homework. The first entries spoke of lessons, students, and quiet evenings by the fire. But midway, the tone shifted. Dates clustered near the end of spring 15 years ago. April 8th. A strange rash on 3 students. Doctor says coincidence. But the creek water smells sharp, like paint thinner. April 17th. Reported to the town office. No reply. May 3rd. A man came, said he was from Northbridge Developments, offered to buy my property for their new project. I refused. That evening, someone broke into my shed. May 9th. Deputy Benson warned me to be careful. He believes me, but says, this town belongs to them. Mike paused. Deputy Benson, the same man who'd stood on his porch last week with polite concern. He felt the edge of betrayal cut through him, then tempered it. 15 years changed people. Fear more than greed could bend even honest men. Shadow nudged his hand as if to remind him that the present still required attention. Mike turned the final page. The writing had grown hurried, slanted, as if she'd written while trembling. If I disappear, it means they found what I hid. The truth is under the hearth, the proof in the water. Don't let them build. Don't let them say it was madness. There was no closing signature, only the imprint of a dried tear near the margin. He set the journal down, the edges of its pages fluttering in the draft. His hands were steady, but the air inside him wasn't. A woman had died, or been made to vanish, for this. And now he had her voice in his hands. That afternoon, Linda Gomez arrived, bundled in a thick coat and carrying a paper-wrapped pie that smelled of cinnamon and worry. "You didn't show up in town for supplies," she said by way of greeting. "I figured you might have forgotten what warmth tastes like." Mike smiled faintly. "You didn't have to." She stepped in, looked around, and froze at the sight of the open hearth. "You found something." He didn't answer right away, only set the leather journal on the table. She stared at the name on its cover, color draining from her face. Lord, Eleanor." Linda sat down heavily. Her hands trembled as she untied her scarf. "She was my friend," she said softly. "We had coffee here every Sunday after church. She'd talk about her students, her garden, her fight with those Northbridge men. They came to her door more than once. Everyone told her to sell, to leave town. But she said the creek was poisoned and she had proof." "She was right," Mike said. "I found the samples." Linda's gaze moved to the vials, cloudy under the lantern light. "They said she'd gone crazy," she whispered. Then one morning she was just gone. No note, no goodbye. Sheriff Riggs told us she must have run off after breaking down. "Riggs?" Mike frowned. "Not Benson?" Linda shook her head. "Benson was still deputy then. Riggs took over after they found her car by Dry Willow Creek. Empty." The room seemed to tighten around them. Outside, wind pushed against the windows in slow, rhythmic gusts. Mike poured 2 cups of coffee, his movements measured. "Linda, do you still have friends at the courthouse? Someone who might remember what happened to her report?" "Maybe," she said, though her voice was distant. "Most folks who did are gone, retired, or keeping quiet." She looked up suddenly, eyes fierce. "You shouldn't stay here. They won't like that you're digging." He smiled without humor. "I wasn't planning to leave." When she left, she paused on the porch. "She believed someone would find it, you know," she said. "She told me once, truth doesn't die. It waits. Maybe it waited for you." As her figure disappeared down the snowy road, Mike looked toward the hills. Truth was a fine word, but truth also got people buried. That evening he sat at the table with the journal open and the tin box beside him. He began scanning each page with his phone, creating digital copies. When he was done, he composed an email draft. To Ben Parker, former Army brother turned investigative journalist in Denver. The message was brief and coded. Found something old, same enemy, new uniform. If I go dark by 0600, send everything to EPA and Bureau. Attachments to follow. He encrypted the files and saved them, but didn't hit send. Not yet. He needed one more day to verify what he had. Shadow lay by the door, half asleep, but every so often his ears flicked at some sound Mike couldn't hear. Around midnight, the dog rose, padded to the window, and gave a low growl that never reached a bark. Mike killed the lantern instantly. From the darkness outside, faint headlights flashed once, then vanished. Not a passing car, but a stationary beam cut abruptly short. He waited 10 minutes, breath shallow, then silence, long and clean. He switched the lantern back on. On the table, beside the journal, lay a scrap of paper that hadn't been there before. Thin, torn, the ink fresh and still wet. Just 2 words, scrawled in haste. Leave now. Mike's hand tightened around the note. He looked at the hearthstone, the open box, the journal. "Too late," he whispered. "We've already started." Shadow pressed against his leg, muscles tense. Somewhere beyond the window, a car door clicked softly, and the night swallowed the sound whole. Snow returned the next morning, light as ash, drifting across the yard in slow spirals. Mike had slept little, his mind circling the words scrawled on that scrap of paper. Leave now. He had left it on the table beside Eleanor's journal, where it seemed to stare back at him each time he passed. Whoever had slipped it under his door knew the layout of the cabin, and how to move quietly enough to fool both him and Shadow. That meant training or familiarity. Neither comforted him. Shadow paced the perimeter of the house, tail stiff, every sense alive. When he wasn't moving, he sat facing the fireplace, eyes steady, ears twitching. The dog's instincts had saved Mike more than once in Iraq, and he'd learned never to doubt them. Now, as Shadow's low growl rolled out again, Mike understood. The hearth still held something. He moved deliberately, sliding the tin box and Eleanor's journal aside. The floor around the hearth was rough, uneven. He brushed away dust, feeling with his fingertips until they caught on a ridge where the mortar texture shifted slightly. Someone had patched a section with a different compound. Newer, smoother, too deliberate. He fetched his crowbar and a mallet, wedged the bar into a faint crack between stones, and levered carefully. A dull, gritty pop broke the silence. A piece of the hearthstone lifted free, revealing darkness beneath. A pocket of stale, dry air rushed out. He knelt, flashlight angled inside. Something metallic reflected the beam. A second box, larger than the first, wrapped in layers of oilcloth. When he dragged it free, dust and grit trailed behind like the residue of years buried alive. The lid opened with a reluctant screech. Inside lay 2 bound notebooks, edges water-stained but intact, a folded map, and several glass vials sealed with wax. Each vial was labeled with neat handwriting. Dry Willow Creek, South Fork Reservoir, Riverton Elementary Tap. The map bore the county outline, red ink circling the very places locals had drawn their drinking water from. Every circle connected to a handwritten note. Detected. AS2 C6H6 traces. Ongoing discharge from NB facility. Mike's breath came slow. NB, Northbridge. It was all here. Proof Eleanor had found contamination before she vanished. The first notebook was a log of field notes, temperatures, water levels, coordinates. The second was more personal, a chronicle of fear, June 10th. Someone followed me from the school parking lot. Same truck as before. Brown Ford, no plates. He waited outside the house until midnight. When I called the sheriff, they said I was imagining it. Another entry, written days later. They told me to stop testing the water, said the company is cleaning it up. Lies. The children are sick. Even if I disappear, the truth will stay here. I hid copies with the samples. If someone finds this, tell them not to trust anyone wearing a badge or a Northbridge pin." Mike closed the notebook, jaw tightening. He remembered Linda saying Sheriff Riggs had taken over after the disappearance. Riggs, now head of Riverton's law enforcement, had likely helped bury the case. He spread the documents across the table, took photos, and backed them up to an encrypted drive. Then he drafted a new message to Ben Parker. Confirmed. Physical evidence recovered. Arsenic, benzene, industrial byproduct data. Eleanor Price was right. Possible law enforcement collusion. We'll send copy if safe by 0600. If not, act. He hit send this time. Shadow let out a sudden bark, sharp, urgent. Mike dropped his phone and crossed to the window. Outside, a truck idled at the edge of the drive, black paint dulled by fallen snow. No lights, no markings. The driver stayed inside. After half a minute, the engine cut and the truck rolled backward down the hill, disappearing into the trees. Mike didn't move until the sound of tires faded completely. The afternoon darkened early, the kind of gray that presses low on the chest. He sealed the vials in a waterproof pouch and buried them under the old woodpile outside. Then he returned to the house and locked every door. Near sunset, a knock came. 2 short raps, polite but heavy. Mike approached quietly, revolver ready but hidden. When he opened the door, he found Deputy Carl Benson standing in the snow, hat in hand, breath fogging. "Evening, Mr. Harris," the deputy said. His tone was calm, but his eyes flicked once toward the window, scanning the interior. "Mind if I step in? Got word from town someone spotted a strange truck up this way." Mike studied him. The man looked tired, snow in his beard, concern honest, or practiced. "Truck's gone," Mike said. "Didn't get close." Benson nodded slowly. "You armed?" "Always." The deputy gave a short, approving grunt. "Good. Can't be too careful these days. Strange folks moving through. Developers sniffing again. Northbridge wants that land cleared, rumor says." The name hung between them. Benson's jaw tightened just slightly, enough to confirm what Mike already suspected. "You ever meet their boss?" Mike asked. Benson hesitated. "Victor Hale, only once. He came through town years ago. Smooth talker, expensive boots. Promised new jobs, better water systems, a fresh start for Riverton. Funny how men like that never drink the water themselves." Mike studied him carefully. "You knew Eleanor Price, didn't you?" For a long moment the deputy said nothing. Then, with a slow sigh, he nodded. "I did. Tried to help her at first. She came to me scared, said she'd found something in the creek. I told her to keep quiet until I could check it out. By the time I went back, she was gone. Sheriff Riggs took the case, sealed the report, told me it was hysteria. You believed that?" "I wanted to." Benson's gaze dropped to the floor. "But I kept her report. Couldn't let it die completely." He reached into his coat, withdrew a folded manila envelope, and slid it across the table. "Her handwriting's on every page. You'll see the same numbers you've got there." Mike opened it. The document was water-damaged but legible. Eleanor's original submission to the county. Signed, dated, never filed. "She wasn't crazy," Benson said quietly. "She was brave, and they punished her for it." Before Mike could speak, a sharp crack split the air, a gunshot from the trees. The window shattered, spraying glass. Shadow barked once, fierce and loud, then dropped low beside Mike's leg. Benson dove to the floor, drew his weapon. "A sniper?" Mike hissed. "Single shot. Warning," Benson muttered. "They're telling us to stop talking." Mike crawled to the window frame, peered through the jagged hole. Snow stirred in the wind, but there was movement beyond the tree line, a figure retreating toward the road. "Get down to your cruiser," Mike said. "Go now." Benson shook his head. "If they see me leave, I'll draw them straight to town. I'll circle wide through the creek bed." He rose, coat pulled tight. "You keep that dog close and keep your lights off tonight. If I don't check in by morning, trust Ben Parker. He's cleaner than any badge left here." Then he was gone, melting into the trees. Mike patched the window with the plastic tarp and moved the table against the wall. Shadow never stopped watching the door. The night deepened, the kind that swallows color and breath alike. Sometime near midnight, a faint clatter came from beneath the floorboards. Mike froze, listening. The sound was rhythmic, metal on wood. He lifted a loose plank near the hearth and found a pipe vent leading down into the crawl space. The sound echoed from below. He shone his flashlight in time to see a pair of gloved hands withdrawing through the darkness, followed by the hiss of boots on frozen earth. Someone had been under his floor. He replaced the board, locked the hatch, and sat with his back against the wall until dawn pressed pale light against the tarp. When he finally stood, he knew what had to happen next. He packed Eleanor's notebooks, the vials, and Benson's envelope into a sealed rucksack. The cabin had become a hunting blind, and he was the quarry. "Shadow," he said quietly, clipping on the dog's collar, "we're not running. We're finishing what she started." Shadow's ears flicked forward as if he understood. Outside, the first light of morning touched the chimney stone, making it glow faintly gold. A single warm breath in a frozen world. The morning broke pale and silent, a frost-bitten calm that felt too deliberate to trust. Mike hadn't slept. He sat at the table with his sidearm disassembled before him, the rhythmic click of metal on wood the only sound in the room. Shadow lay nearby, eyes half closed but muscles taut, every breath measured. The tarp over the shattered window trembled with the wind. Beyond it, the woods were white and still, too still. At 7:15 a.m., a low rumble drifted from down Hollow Way. Through the frost-glazed window, Mike saw a silver sedan climb the hill. It wasn't Benson's patrol car. He tucked his weapon away, drew the curtain just enough to watch. The sedan stopped short of the porch, tires crunching the icy gravel. A man stepped out, gray suit, black overcoat, shiny shoes that didn't belong in the snow. He carried a clipboard and an expression polished smooth by practice. "Mr. Harris," he called, voice crisp. "Daniel Ricks, City Compliance. We met before." Mike didn't open the door. "What do you want?" Ricks smiled, small and tight. "There's been a safety complaint. Gas leaks, structural issues, possible trespassing. You can't legally occupy the property until cleared, but the city's willing to expedite a buyout. Northbridge is still offering to take the land off your hands. Triple your original purchase. That's quite a profit for a soldier's patience." The wind hissed through the pines. Mike studied him, expression unreadable. "You filed that complaint yourself, didn't you?" Ricks's smile faltered. "I'm just following protocol." "Whose protocol?" Mike asked. The man's gaze flickered, a flash of annoyance breaking through the veneer. "Mr. Harris, you don't understand how things work here. The town's better off when certain matters stay quiet. It's not your fight." Mike's tone was calm but cold. "You're right. It was Eleanor Price's fight first. I'm just finishing what she started." Something passed between them, something wordless and sharp. Rick straightened his tie, face hardening. "You should think carefully about that." He turned, walked back to his car, and drove off without another word. Mike watched until the taillights vanished. Then he sat back down, opened his notebook, and wrote in neat, square letters. Ricks equals pressure agent. Northbridge testing reactions. Expect escalation. By noon, the wind had picked up, scattering thin veils of snow across the porch. He was sealing cracks along the doorframe when the radio in his truck crackled to life, an old CB unit he'd left tuned to the local emergency band. Static gave way to a clipped transmission. "Unit 12, this is dispatch, attempting to contact with Deputy Benson. Last check-in, 2100 hours, no response." Mike froze. The voice repeated the message twice more before the line went dead. Benson had gone silent. He felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the same coiled instinct that had saved him overseas. He called Ben Parker immediately. The journalist's voice came through rough with static. "Mike, I got your files. Jesus, it's solid. Lab results, GPS data, everything. EPA contact confirmed receipt, but that are moving slow. You need to get out of there." "No," Mike said. "They know I have it. Ricks just paid me a visit." "Then it's time to push the story. I can leak the evidence to 3 outlets in Denver within the hour." "Not yet. There's more in the ground here. I can feel it. Something they didn't recover when she vanished." Ben sighed, frustration breaking through. "You always think you can fight ghosts with logic." "Not ghosts," Mike said quietly. "Men." Before they could say more, a sharp crack split the air. Wood splintering in the back of the house. Shadow barked, deep and furious. Mike dropped the phone and sprinted to the hallway. The rear door hung ajar. Hinges twisted. Footprints crossed the snow toward the tree line. Someone had tried to break in again, this time during daylight. He followed the trail to the edge of the woods, but stopped when he saw a glint on the ground. A bullet casing. Spent. He pocketed it and returned to the cabin, adrenaline steady now, his movements precise. He reinforced the back door with 2 planks and checked his ammo. Shadow watched him, tail low, growling softly. At sunset, the phone buzzed again, an unknown number. Mike answered without a word. "Mr. Harris," a smooth voice said, "this is Victor Hale. I believe you've been speaking with some of my less diplomatic associates." The name made the air heavier. "Your people have been sloppy," Mike said. Hale chuckled, a low, deliberate sound. "They're passionate. Not unlike you, I suspect. Look, I understand you're a principled man, but principles don't rebuild towns. Money does. Sell me the property, and you'll walk away with $50,000 and peace of mind." "I'm not selling." Silence stretched thin across the line. Then Hale spoke again, the warmth gone from his tone. "You're making a mistake, soldier. The world doesn't reward martyrs anymore." The line went dead. Outside, snow began to fall again, faster this time. Thick flakes spinning through the darkness. Mike turned off the lights, crouched by the window, and waited. The night pressed close. At 10 p.m., headlights appeared at the edge of the road. 2 vehicles this time. One black pickup, one smaller car. Engines idled, doors opened, figures moved. 4, maybe 5 men. One carried a canister, gasoline. "Shadow," Mike whispered. The dog was already moving, silent and ready. Mike retrieved the vials and documents from under the floorboard, stuffing them into his rucksack. He slipped on his Carhartt jacket, the canvas darkened by years of use, and loaded his pistol. The first bottle shattered against the porch, gasoline. The smell rushed in with the cold. Mike ducked low, grabbed his duffel, and slipped through the back door, circling wide through the trees. Shadow followed, paws crunching softly in snow. From the slope above the cabin, Mike watched the figures move methodically, splashing fuel along the walls. A match flared. Flames licked upward, orange against white. The cabin glowed like a pyre. The men turned toward their truck, but then a distant rumble cut through the night, a helicopter, spotlights carved through the snowfall. Voices boomed through loudspeakers. "Federal agents! Drop your weapons!" The men scattered. Two dove for the pickup. One slipped in the snow and fell. Hale's voice rose somewhere in the chaos, shouting orders drowned by the thrum of rotor blades. Mike stayed hidden, the fire reflecting in his eyes. He saw agents swarm the clearing, heard the metallic rhythm of handcuffs snapping shut. Shadow stood beside him, breath steaming in the cold, gaze fixed on the inferno that had been their shelter. When it was over, the only thing left standing of the cabin was the stone chimney, blackened but unbroken. The agents combed the scene while one of them, a woman with a wind-chapped face and sharp eyes, approached Mike's position. "Mr. Harris?" she asked, flashing her badge. "Agent Ruiz, FBI Environmental Crimes Unit. We received materials from Benjamin Parker this morning. You've been busy." He nodded once. "Hale's your man. He's been dumping industrial waste into the Dry Willow watershed for over a decade. Eleanor Price tried to expose it. They silenced her." Ruiz's eyes softened just slightly. "Not anymore." She gestured toward the wreckage. "We'll process what's left. You did the right thing calling it in." Mike glanced at the flames. "Didn't call it in." "Then someone did," Ruiz said. "Guess you've got guardian angels after all." Mike didn't answer. He only watched the fire until dawn's first light began to thin the smoke. Snow fell in wide, slow spirals that night, muffling the sound of engines before they even reached the valley. The air smelled of ash and frozen pine. Mike stood by the edge of the clearing, half hidden in the shadows of the trees, his breath ghosting through the cold. Shadow pressed close against his leg, ears pricked, eyes fixed on the glow flickering from below. The remains of his cabin still smoldered, a black silhouette against the white of the field. He could hear the FBI agents shouting orders, the crunch of boots, the metallic rhythm of evidence crates closing. It was over, or so everyone said. But Mike had been a soldier too long to believe in clean endings. The men in handcuffs would talk, the reports would pile high, and somewhere behind a desk another man in a suit would start rewriting the truth. He turned at the sound of crunching snow. Agent Ruiz approached, collar up against the wind, flashlight beam bouncing off the frost. Up close, she looked more exhausted than fierce, dark hair tied back, eyes rimmed with the fatigue of too many 3 a.m. debriefs. "Mr. Harris," she said, her voice steady but gentler now, "we've confirmed the suspects. Victor Hale and 3 Northbridge contractors. Their equipment's been impounded, along with the dumping records you sent. You did good work." Mike gave a short nod. "What about Deputy Benson?" Her expression shifted, the faintest shadow crossing her face. "He's alive. Found him near the Dry Willow Bridge, unconscious but breathing. Took a blow to the head. He'll make it." Mike exhaled, the first real breath he'd allowed himself in hours. Ruiz looked toward the ruins. We also found human remains under the crawl space, partial skeleton. Forensics think it's been there more than a decade. Mike didn't ask whose. He already knew. He stepped closer to the chimney, one tall, soot-black pillar standing alone, stone fused with ice. The air around it shimmered faintly with heat, as though the fire still lingered beneath. He knelt, brushed away a crust of ash from the lowest stone, and there it was. The faint carving he'd never noticed before, half hidden by soot. E.P. Eleanor Price. Shadow sat beside him, quiet as prayer. Mike touched the initials gently with his gloved hand. "She never left," he said, voice low. "They buried her right under the truth." Ruiz crouched beside him. "We'll get her home, Harris. Properly." He looked at her, the wind tugging at his jacket. "You ever wonder why people like her keep fighting when everyone tells them to stop?" Ruiz's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Because somebody has to start the kind of fight that lasts." She stood, radio crackling at her shoulder. "We'll need your statement for the record, then you're free to go. EPA's moving in by morning. This place is going to be a federal site." Mike nodded again. "I'll give you everything I have." As Ruiz walked back toward the agents, Mike lingered by the chimney. The fire had taken everything, his notebooks, the walls, the floor, but somehow the one thing that mattered most had survived. Truth carved in stone. He thought of Eleanor, of Linda's trembling hands, of Benson's guilt-ridden face, and of all the people who had drunk that poisoned water while officials cashed checks and looked away. He reached into his jacket, pulled out the last thing that had survived, the small brass key Shadow had found weeks ago. He turned it over in his palm. It was warped now, the metal blackened from heat, but it was still whole. "Come on, boy," he said softly. They walked toward the tree line, where the sky burned faint orange above the snow. Behind them, agents worked through the night cataloging the remains of greed and silence. Somewhere in the distance a siren wailed, the sound swallowed quickly by the cold. Halfway down the hill, headlights cut through the fog. Linda Gomez's old station wagon rolled into view, chains rattling softly on its tires. She stepped out, bundled in layers of wool, her face pale in the beam. "I saw the fire from town," she said, voice breaking. "My God, Mike, I thought you were gone." He shook his head. "Not yet." She glanced at the wreckage, eyes glistening. "Eleanor?" "They found her," he said simply. For a long time Linda said nothing. Then she crossed herself and whispered, "She can rest now." Her hands trembled, but her voice steadied. "You did what none of us could." Mike looked back toward the ruins. "She did it. I just followed the trail." Shadow nudged Linda's leg, as if to remind her they were still here, still breathing. She bent to stroke his fur, murmuring something soft in Spanish, a blessing or maybe gratitude. Ruiz approached again, holding a clipboard. "One last thing, Harris. You're free to leave town, but I'd stay close until we finish the investigation. You might be needed as a witness." "I'm not going anywhere," Mike said. "Someone's got to rebuild what they burned." Ruiz studied him for a moment, then extended her hand. "Then maybe this town has a chance." He shook it firmly. When she left, the snow began to ease. The storm had spent itself. The sky broke open just enough for the stars to show. distant, unbothered but watching. Mike stood there a long while, his boots sinking into the softened snow. The wind carried the faintest scent of wood smoke and thawing pine, a strange blend of ending and beginning. He crouched beside Shadow, scratching behind his ears. "We did it," he said quietly. "Not for medals, just for the truth." Shadow leaned against him, warmth seeping through the layers of cold canvas and denim. For the first time since he'd arrived in Riverton, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. Behind them, the chimney stood tall against the dawn, black stone against the rising light, initials glinting faintly under a new day. A month later, spring arrived like a hesitant apology. The snow retreated from the valley, leaving behind a mosaic of wet earth, broken twigs, and the first stubborn shoots of grass. Where Mike's cabin had once stood, only the stone chimney remained. Blackened but proud, a monument to stubborn truth. The town of Riverton was waking up too. Cleanup trucks rumbled down Main Street, hauling out barrels of tainted soil. Federal contractors in white suits tested wells and creeks, their orange markers fluttering in the thawing breeze. The newspapers called it the Riverton Scandal, but locals just called it Eleanor's Justice. Mike stood on the hill overlooking the site, hands in his jacket pockets, Shadow sitting beside him. The dog had grown leaner through the winter, but his eyes were bright, scanning the land as if guarding it still. From below came laughter, the light kind, brittle but real. A group of volunteers hammered beams together where Mike's cabin used to be. Among them was Linda Gomez, scarf flapping in the breeze, arguing good-naturedly with a younger worker about how to set the foundation straight. When she noticed Mike watching, she waved, then trudged up the muddy slope to join him. "You're supposed to be helping, not brooding," she said, panting slightly. "I'm supervising," he replied, a hint of dry humor in his voice. Linda smiled. "Well, Supervisor Harris, you've got quite the fan club now. The news says you're a hero. Half the town wants to bake for you." He shook his head. "Eleanor was the hero. I just listened." Linda's eyes softened. "Maybe, but it took someone alive to make people hear her." She looked toward the rebuilt foundation. "They're calling it the Eleanor Price Environmental Center. City Council approved it last week. The school kids are going to plant trees there once the soil clears." Mike's gaze followed hers, a quiet pride stirring beneath the fatigue. "She'd like that," he said. "She would," Linda agreed. "And she'd probably make us scrub the floors before opening day." They both chuckled softly. Shadow barked once, a low, friendly sound, as a group of children ran up the road, chasing a paper kite painted bright yellow. The wind tugged it higher, and for a brief second the kite passed in front of the sun, glowing like a fragment of gold leaf. Linda tilted her head toward the site. "You ever think about staying? Riverton could use a man who doesn't scare easy." "I've been thinking about it," Mike said. "This place could use someone to keep the lights on, make sure it doesn't get buried again." "Well," she said, patting his arm, "you've got a spare pair of hands in town, and a spare oven if you ever get tired of beans." He smiled, real and unguarded. "I'll keep that in mind." As she walked back down, Mike lingered, the wind brushing at his hair. He reached down to scratch Shadow behind the fire. "Looks like we're staying, partner." The dog wagged his tail once, thumped it against the wet ground, and leaned into his side. Later that afternoon, he drove into town for supplies. The streets looked cleaner, brighter somehow. Posters for Eleanor Price Memorial Fund hung on every lamp post. A mural near the school showed her face, kind-eyed and calm, painted above the words, "Truth never drowns." Deputy Benson met him outside the general store, his head wrapped in a healing bandage but his grin intact. "Still owe you a beer," he said. Mike shook his hand. "Just glad you made it." "They're saying Hale flipped," Benson continued. "He's naming everyone involved, county officials, a senator, half the Northbridge board. Guess he didn't expect the Bureau to dig that deep." Mike's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed steady. "Greed always leaves fingerprints." "Yeah," Benson said. "And sometimes folks like you wipe the dust off long enough for the rest of us to see 'em." They shared a nod, a soldier's kind of understanding, the kind that needed no more words. When Mike returned home, twilight had softened the valley. The volunteers had left for the day. The new frame of the house stood against the fading light, unfinished but alive. He climbed the steps of the half-built porch and sat down. Shadow settled beside him, head resting on Mike's boot. From the chimney, a lone robin landed on the edge of stone, singing a brief, uncertain note before taking flight again. Mike looked out toward Dry Willow Creek, where the EPA crews were packing up for the night. The water shimmered faintly silver under the moonlight, no longer dull with poison. He took a slow breath. For the first time in years, the air didn't feel heavy. It smelled of thawing soil, clean and new. He whispered, "You were right, Eleanor. Truth waits." Shadow lifted his head, as if in answer, and the two of them sat there until the stars came out, watching over a town learning to breathe again. In the hush that followed the storm, Riverton found its rhythm again. The poisoned creek turned clear, the trees whispered green instead of grief, and laughter returned to the schoolyard. But for Mike, the true miracle wasn't in what changed around him. It was in what stayed unbroken within him. He understood now that God's miracles rarely arrived in thunder or light. Sometimes they came quietly, in the courage to stay, in a neighbor's steady kindness, in the way a faithful dog refused to leave his side. The same hands that had once carried a rifle now carried nails and wood, rebuilding what others had burned. And through that small work, he began to see what grace really was. Not the absence of pain, but the strength to love the world after pain. The stone chimney still stood, initials EP catching morning light, not a monument to tragedy, but to faith. Faith that truth endures, that good still finds its way through ash, that redemption belongs to those who refuse to turn away. So, if you're watching this story tonight, from your living room, your kitchen table, or maybe a quiet hospital room, remember, sometimes the miracle isn't waiting to happen. Sometimes you are the miracle God sends. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes in second chances. Leave a comment, tell us what truth means to you, and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and the grace that keeps us standing. May God bless you, your home, and every place where love dares to rebuild what the world once tried to burn.